driving for hours, the empty highway stretching out before me like an unending ribbon. The solitude was both comforting and unnerving. My name is Jack, and I often took these long drives to clear my mind. There was something about the open road that helped me think, helped me escape from the daily grind. But this drive was different. The night was darker than usual, and the air carried a strange sense of foreboding. The gas gauge on my car dipped into the red, and I knew I had to find a place to refuel soon. The nearest town was still miles away, and I was in the middle of nowhere. Just as I was starting to worry, I saw a flickering light in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was a gas station. Relieved, I pulled in, the tires crunching on the gravel. The station looked old, almost abandoned, with peeling paint and broken windows. But the lights were on, and a solitary figure stood behind the counter inside. I parked next to the pump and got out, stretching my legs. The air was cold, and the silence was almost palpable. I walked into the station, the bell above the door jingling softly as I entered. The man behind the counter looked up as I walked in. He was in his 50s, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He seemed startled to see me, as if he wasn't expecting anyone at this hour. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded curtly, his eyes darting nervously to the clock on the wall. "Just need to fill up," I said, handing him my credit card. He took it without a word, swiping it quickly and handing it back. "You're my last customer for the night," he said, his voice strained. "I'm closing up right after this." There was something off about the way he spoke, like he was trying to hide his anxiety. As I walked back to the pump to fill my tank, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The man's behavior was odd, almost frantic. I glanced back at the station and saw him peeking out from behind the curtain, watching me intently. My curiosity got the better of me. Why was he Southwest eager to close up? What was he hiding? I decided to stick around and find out. After filling up, I pretended to leave but parked my car a little way down the road, out of sight. I waited for a few minutes, watching the gas station. The owner came out, looked around nervously, and then started walking towards a nearby barn. Intrigued, I decided to follow him. I kept my distance, making sure to stay hidden. The night was eerily silent, and the only sounds were my footsteps crunching on the gravel and the distant rustle of leaves. The barn was old and dilapidated, its wooden doors hanging off their hinges. As I got closer, I heard strange noises coming from inside, growls and snarls that made my blood run cold. The owner stopped at the barn door, looking around once more before slipping inside. I crept up to the door and peered through a crack. Inside, the barn was dimly lit, and I could see chains hanging from the rafters. The growling grew louder, more menacing. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized something was very wrong. Gathering my courage, I pushed the door open slightly and slipped inside. Inside the barn, the sight that greeted me was like something out of a nightmare. A huge, hulking figure was chained to the wall, its eyes glowing yellow in the dim light. It was a werewolf, its fur matted and bloodied, its teeth bared in a feral snarl. The owner stood a few feet away, a look of grim determination on his face. "This is why I wanted you gone," he said, not turning to look at me. "It's a curse. The town has been dealing with it for generations. Every full moon, this beast comes out, and we have to lock it up to keep everyone safe." His voice was filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I asked, my voice trembling. He shook his head. "Who would believe me? They'd think I'm crazy. It's safer to keep it a secret." The werewolf growled, pulling against its chains, and I took a step back, my heart racing. "Tonight's a full moon," he continued, his eyes fixed on the beast. "I have to make sure it stays locked up until morning." He turned to face me, his expression desperate. "You need to leave now, before it's too late." Before I could respond, the werewolf let out a deafening roar and broke free from its chains. It lunged at the owner, knocking him to the ground. I watched in horror as he struggled to fend off the creature, his screams filling the air. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like lead. Summoning every ounce of strength, I turned and ran for the door. The werewolf's roars echoed behind me, and I could hear the owner's desperate cries. I burst through the barn doors and sprinted towards my car, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature was right behind me, its snarls growing louder with each step. I reached my car and fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Just as I got the door open, the werewolf pounced, its claws raking across my back. I screamed in pain, but managed to slam the door shut, trapping the beast's arm in the window. It howled in rage, thrashing against the car. I started the engine and floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching as I sped away. The werewolf's arm was torn free, and I could see it in the rearview mirror, chasing me down the road. Blood soaked my shirt, and my vision blurred with pain, but I kept driving, desperate to put as much distance between me and the creature as possible. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached a small town the next morning. Exhausted and injured, I checked into a motel and collapsed onto the bed. The events of the previous night played over and over in my mind, and I knew I had to find out more about the gas station and the werewolf. The next day, I went to the local hospital to get my wounds treated. The pain was unbearable, and I needed medical attention. The nurse who admitted me was kind and efficient, quickly getting me into a room to wait for the doctor. As I sat there, the memories of the attack haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed answers. The doctor who came to see me was an older man, Dr. Harold. He had a kind face, with deep lines etched from years of experience. As he examined my injuries, his expression grew serious. "These are some nasty wounds. What happened to you?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I was attacked," I said vaguely. Dr. Harold nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "By what?" "These don't look like any animal bites I've ever seen." Seeing no other option, I decided to tell him the truth. "It was a werewolf," I said, bracing myself for disbelief. But to my surprise, Dr. Harold didn't laugh or dismiss my story. Instead, he sighed heavily and sat down. "I was afraid of that," he said quietly. Before I could ask what he meant, an elderly patient in the next bed over spoke up. "I knew it was only a matter of time before it happened again," the man said, his voice raspy. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, a longtime resident of the town. Dr. Harold nodded in agreement, and it was clear that they both knew more than they were letting on. "That gas station you stopped at," Dr. Harold began, "has been abandoned for years. No one in their right mind goes there, especially on a full moon." He went on to explain that the town had a dark history, one that involved a curse and a werewolf that terrorized the area every full moon. Mr. Thompson chimed in, recounting stories he had heard as a child. "They say a long time ago, the townspeople angered a powerful witch, and she cursed them. Ever since, every full moon, the werewolf appears. The gas station was built to contain the beast, but it never worked for long." I listened in stunned silence, absorbing the horrifying truth. The man I had encountered at the gas station was likely a caretaker, someone tasked with keeping the werewolf under control. But the curse was too strong, and now I was caught in its web. The weight of their words settled heavily on my shoulders, and I realized that my nightmare was far from over. As Dr. Harold finished bandaging my wounds, he gave me a stern look. "You need to be careful. This town has a way of pulling you into its darkness. If you're not careful, you might not make it out." His words sent a chill down my spine, and I knew I had to leave this place before it was too late. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The wounds on my back healed quickly, too quickly. I started feeling strange as the next full moon approached. My senses were heightened, and my emotions were erratic. I was easily angered, and my appetite grew insatiable. One night, I looked in the mirror and noticed something alarming. My eyes were changing, turning a sickly yellow, just like the werewolf's. Panic set in as I realized what was happening. The beast had injured me, and now I was transforming into one of them. The full moon was only a night away, and I could feel the change taking hold. I locked myself in my motel room, desperate to prevent myself from harming anyone. But as the moon rose, I felt the transformation begin. Pain racked my body, and I watched in horror as my features twisted and contorted. My teeth elongated, my nails turned into claws, and fur sprouted from my skin. The last thing I saw before losing control completely was my reflection in the mirror, my eyes glowing yellow, a feral snarl on my lips. The beast within me had awakened, and there was no turning back. I never believed in the supernatural, but that all changed during a road trip with my husband, Tom. We were driving through a remote stretch of highway, miles away from civilization. The plan was to enjoy a peaceful journey, just the two of us, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. Little did we know, we were driving straight into a nightmare. The night was pitch black, the only light coming from our car's headlights cutting through the darkness. The road ahead seemed endless, a ribbon of asphalt stretching into the unknown. Tom and I chatted about mundane things, trying to keep ourselves awake and alert. But there was an eerie silence that seemed to swallow our voices, making the atmosphere feel heavy and oppressive. We talked about our plans, our dreams, and laughed at inside jokes, but beneath our laughter, a strange tension simmered. As we drove deeper into the night, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia, but the unease grew stronger with each passing mile. The air felt colder, and an unsettling chill ran down my spine. Tom, sensing my discomfort, reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's just the night getting to us," he said, trying to reassure me. I nodded, but my eyes kept darting to the shadows outside, expecting to see something lurking there. We had been on the road for hours, the monotony of the dark landscape pressing down on us. The GPS signal was lost, leaving us with only the vague directions we had written down. The isolation was palpable, each minute stretching out in an unending suspense. Tom turned on the radio, but it only emitted static, adding to the eerie atmosphere. As we continued, I couldn't help but feel that our journey was about to take a dark turn. It was around midnight when we first saw it, a figure standing on the side of the road. Tom slowed down, squinting through the windshield to get a better look. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her face hidden by long, dark hair. She seemed out of place, like a ghost from a bygone era. "Should we stop?" Tom asked, his voice tinged with concern. The figure didn't move, just stood there, eerily still. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I looked at her. There was something profoundly unsettling about the way she just appeared out of nowhere. Against my better judgment, I nodded. Maybe she needs help. We pulled over, and Tom got out of the car, his steps cautious. I stayed inside, my heart pounding in my chest. He called out to the woman, but she didn't respond. Her silence was deafening, adding to the growing sense of dread. As he approached her cautiously, she vanished into thin air. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, leaving no trace behind. Tom turned back to me, his face pale with confusion. "She's gone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a shiver run through me. "Let's get out of here," I urged, my voice trembling. We hurried back into the car, the silence now filled with an unspoken fear. As we drove away, I couldn't shake off the image of the woman. Who was she? And why did she disappear? The questions buzzed in my mind, but I had no answers. The road ahead seemed even darker, and I couldn't help but feel that we had just stepped into a waking nightmare. We drove in silence, both of us too shaken to speak. The encounter with the mysterious woman had left us unnerved, but the sense of unease didn't leave us. Strange things started happening almost immediately. The radio, which had been playing static, suddenly came to life, emitting an eerie, old-timey song that neither of us recognized. "What's happening?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The melody was haunting, sending chills down my spine. Tom tried to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. The song played on, its haunting tune filling the car. We exchanged worried glances, realizing that something beyond our understanding was at play. The temperature in the car dropped suddenly, and we both felt an icy presence. It was as if the air itself had turned against us, chilling us to the bone. "This isn't normal," Tom muttered, his breath visible in the cold air. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off the cold, but it was more than just physical. It was a cold that seeped into my soul, filling me with dread. As we continued down the seemingly endless road, the strange occurrences escalated. The headlights flickered, casting erratic shadows that played tricks on our eyes. I thought I saw figures in the darkness, fleeting glimpses of ghostly shapes that vanished as soon as I tried to focus on them. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Tom nodded, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice firm but edged with fear. The sense of being watched grew stronger, an oppressive weight that seemed to press down on us from all sides. Every rustle of the wind, every shadow seemed alive, filled with malevolent intent. I felt trapped, suffocated by the darkness and the unseen eyes that I was certain were watching our every move. The road stretched on, an unending path into the heart of the unknown. After what felt like hours, we saw a sign pointing to a town we had never heard of. Desperate for a break from the relentless road, we decided to take the turn. The road leading to the town was narrow and overgrown, flanked by dense trees that loomed ominously over us. As we drove deeper, the trees seemed to close in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab us. The town was old, abandoned, and eerily quiet. The buildings looked like they hadn't been touched in decades, their windows shattered and walls covered in ivy. It was as if time had forgotten this place, leaving it to decay in isolation. We parked the car and got out, curiosity getting the better of us. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rot. "Let's have a look around," Tom suggested, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. He was trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in his eyes. As we walked through the empty streets, our footsteps echoed eerily. The silence was oppressive, amplifying every sound we made. I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were not alone, that the town itself was watching us. We came across an old library, its doors hanging off their hinges. Inside, we found photographs and documents that hinted at a dark history. There were pictures of people dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces solemn and eyes haunting. The more we looked, the more unsettling the images became. Faces distorted in fear, eyes wide with terror. "This place gives me the creeps," I said, flipping through a dusty old book. It contained stories of strange rituals and mysterious disappearances. It was then we realized we had stumbled upon a place with a sinister past. The town had been abandoned for a reason, and whatever had driven the inhabitants away still lingered. We explored further, finding more evidence of the town's dark history. Old newspapers spoke of a series of mysterious deaths, the victims all found with expressions of sheer terror on their faces. There were whispers of occult practices, of rituals conducted in the dead of night. The more we read, the more we realized that this town was steeped in evil. The longer we stayed, the more unsettling things became. I started having visions, ghostly figures appearing in the corners of my eyes, only to vanish when I turned to look. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the apparitions became more frequent and vivid. Shadowy figures, their faces twisted in agony, reached out to me, their eyes pleading for help. Tom wasn't immune either. He heard whispers, his name being called from the shadows, claiming he felt hands gripping him, trying to pull him away. The inn we had found for shelter seemed to be a focal point for the haunting. Its old walls groaned and creaked, and the air was thick with an oppressive energy. "We need to leave," he said, panic creeping into his voice. But when we tried to start the car, it wouldn't budge. The engine sputtered and died, leaving us stranded. The realization that we were trapped hit us hard. Desperation drove us to seek answers. We scoured the town, looking for any clue that might help us escape. In the library, we found an old journal hidden behind a false panel in the wall. It was a diary of one of the town's last inhabitants, detailing the events leading up to the abandonment. The entry spoke of strange occurrences, of the townspeople dabbling in dark rituals to summon entities from beyond. The final entry was a warning, a plea to whoever found the journal to leave and never return. The haunting reached its peak that night. Shadows moved on their own, and ghostly faces appeared in the mirrors, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. We heard footsteps echoing in the halls, doors slamming shut on their own. The spirits of the town were restless, and they made their presence known in the most terrifying ways. Unable to sleep, I spent the night reading the journal we had found in the library. It detailed the town's history, a curse that trapped anyone who entered. The townspeople had dabbled in the occult, and their dark practices had unleashed something evil. The journal described how they had conducted rituals to gain power and control, but instead, they had brought doom upon themselves. "We need to break the curse," I told Tom, showing him the journal. The entries were filled with accounts of the horrors that had befallen the town's residents, their desperate attempts to escape the malevolent forces they had summoned. The final entry was a detailed description of a ritual that could break the curse and free the trapped souls. He nodded, determination in his eyes. "But, how can we do this?" We had no experience with such things, but the journal provided step-by-step instructions. It required items that were scattered around the town, hidden in places of significance. We had to gather them and perform the ritual at the stroke of midnight. We spent the next day searching the town, finding the items mentioned in the journal. An old locket, a tattered piece of cloth, a vial of water from the town's well, each item held a piece of the town's history and its tragic fate. As we collected the items, we felt the presence of the spirits grow stronger, as if they were aware of our intentions. The atmosphere in the town grew more oppressive with each passing hour. The shadows lengthened, and the air grew colder. We heard whispers, faint at first but growing louder, more insistent. They were warning us, threatening us, but we couldn't back down. We had come too far to turn back now. As midnight approached, we prepared for the ritual. We laid out the items in the town square, as described in the journal. The air was thick with tension, the oppressive presence of the spirits pressing down on us. We began the ritual, reciting the incantations from the journal. The words felt strange on my tongue, ancient and powerful. The spirits grew more aggressive, trying to stop us. They screamed and wailed, their ghostly forms swirling around us. The ground trembled, and the air crackled with energy. It was as if the town itself was fighting against us, trying to keep its dark secrets hidden. We held our ground, our voices steady as we continued the ritual. As we recited the incantations, the spirits became more tangible, their forms more defined. They were angry, their faces twisted in rage and sorrow. They reached out to us, trying to disrupt the ritual. I felt a cold hand grip my arm, pulling me away. I fought against it, focusing on the words, knowing that we had to see this through. Tom stood beside me, his voice unwavering despite the chaos around us. He recited the incantations with a strength I hadn't seen in him before. We were a team, bound together by our determination to escape this nightmare. The spirits screamed in fury, their forms writhing in the air, but we didn't falter. The energy in the air grew more intense, a bright light emanating from the center of the ritual. The spirits recoiled from the light, their screams reaching a fever pitch. The ground shook violently, and I felt a wave of power wash over us. The light grew brighter, engulfing everything in its path. The spirits' screams faded, replaced by a profound silence. With the final words of the ritual, the curse was broken. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the spirits faded away, their forms dissolving into the light. The town began to crumble around us, as if it were finally being released from its own torment. The ground cracked, and the buildings started to collapse, dust and debris filling the air. "We did it," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The sense of relief was overwhelming. We had faced unimaginable horrors and come out the other side. Tom hugged me tightly, his own tears mixing with mine. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. We ran back to the car, which now started without any trouble. As we drove away, the town collapsed behind us, consumed by its own dark past. We didn't look back, focused only on putting as much distance between us and that cursed place as possible. The road ahead seemed brighter, the darkness that had plagued us finally lifting. As we drove, the events of the past few days felt surreal, like a nightmare from which we had just awoken. The terror and despair were replaced by a profound sense of relief and gratitude. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The night sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking on the horizon. The farther we drove, the more the weight of the past days lifted from our shoulders. The haunting memories would stay with us, but we knew we had done something important. We had freed the trapped souls and broken the curse that had held the town in its grip for so long. It was a small victory against the darkness, but a victory nonetheless. Exhausted and shaken, we finally reached the safety of a nearby city. The bright lights and bustling streets were a stark contrast to the dark, abandoned town we had left behind. We checked into a hotel, collapsing onto the bed, our bodies and minds drained from the ordeal. The sense of safety was almost overwhelming. We vowed never to speak of what happened, hoping to leave the nightmare behind us. The memories were too fresh, too raw, to be spoken aloud. We wanted to move forward, to reclaim our lives and find some semblance of normalcy. But the experiences we had gone through had changed us in ways we were only beginning to understand. As the days passed, we slowly began to heal. The terror of that night lingered in our minds, but we found comfort in each other. We had faced something unimaginable and survived. Our bond had grown stronger, forged in the fires of that dark experience. We took solace in the knowledge that we had done the right thing, that we had freed the souls trapped by the curse. But every now and then, I still feel a chill, a reminder of the horrors we faced on that deserted highway. The memories of the ghostly figures, the whispers, and the oppressive darkness are always just beneath the surface. I find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowy figure watching me. Despite the lingering fear, we knew we couldn't let it control our lives. We had faced the darkness and come out the other side. It was a part of our story, a chapter that we would carry with us but not let define us. We had been through hell and back, and now it was time to rebuild, to find joy and light once more. We managed to leave the cursed town just in time, escaping its collapsing ruins and the darkness that had haunted it for so long. The drive away was filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. We had faced a nightmare and survived, and now it was time to move forward. We promised each other that we would never return, that we would leave the past behind us and focus on the future. As we settled back into our normal lives, the memories of that dark road trip began to fade. But they never truly disappeared. They were always there, lurking in the shadows of our minds, a constant reminder of the horrors we had faced. We took comfort in the knowledge that we had broken the curse, that we had freed the trapped souls. It was a small victory, but a significant one. The experience had changed us in ways we were only beginning to understand. We had faced our deepest fears and come out stronger. Our bond had been tested and had grown stronger for it. We had learned to appreciate the small moments of joy and light in our lives, to cherish each other even more. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the shadows of that dark night always lingered. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye or hear a whisper in the wind, and I would be reminded of the haunted town and the horrors we had faced. But I knew that we had done the right thing, that we had faced the darkness and come out victorious. We vowed to live our lives to the fullest, to embrace the light and banish the shadows. The past would always be with us, but it would not define us. We had faced the supernatural and survived, and now it was time to move forward. The road ahead was filled with possibilities, and we were ready to face whatever came our way.